And these days, it's difficult to understand what altruism is, because since Richard Dawkins' book called The Selfish Gene, we've had a kind of new interpretation of what this means. And I'm not criticizing Dawkins in any way, because I think he's a genius. But through misinterpreting Dawkins' principal point, what's happened is we've developed a very negative evolutionary view. This view of survival of the fittest, for example, is very popular amongst white supremacists, etc. When applied to human society, can have rather brutal consequences. And also, if misinterpreted, can lead to very negative consequences. For example, there was the National Socialist movement in the 30s in Nazi Germany. To quote Richard Dawkins, the author of The Selfish Gene, "My own feeling is that a human society based simply on the gene's law of universal ruthless selfishness would be a very nasty society in which to live." So it wasn't as if he was promoting this view. He was merely telling us how it is. We have genetic selfishness that wishes to promote our own genes. And if we do act in a way that is altruistic, it's usually based on self-concern. Some people suggested that there was a predisposition to promote the survival of the species over the individual, but this has been proved to be wrong through some very good science. And so generally in nature, when you see altruistic activities, these have an ulterior motive, so they only appear to be altruistic. But Dawkins isn't suggesting that we shouldn't be altruistic. He's merely saying that that's the way we are programmed. And also, what he suggests is that genetics are not necessarily the most influential factor. In fact, social conditioning is very important. And I suggest that the power of spiritual habituation is something that can create true altruism. Because if you look at the life stories of some of the yogis of the past, for example, Milarepa, then we cannot explain their actions in terms of genetics. And he certainly wasn't crazy. Through their conditioning, through their study, contemplation, and meditation, what they did was fundamentally change their worldview. And if we are to survive into the future, then my opinion is humanity has to evolve. Some suggest that this should be done through genetics. Now that we've mapped the genetic code, we have the ability to select genes and, for example, to breed out negative tendencies like aggression. But to my mind, this process is fraught with many dangers. There's no way we can tell what the long-term consequences of this kind of interference in the human gene will be. Of course, it's inevitable that it will eventually happen, but along the way, there's going to be a lot of trouble. And also, we could inadvertently create a situation where we wipe ourselves out through this kind of research. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm saying we have to be very careful. What I am saying is we already, right now, have very powerful tools for transforming human nature, for affecting human disposition. We have tools for the development of Bodhicitta, that is, loving kindness and compassion, focused on the benefits of all sentient beings, regardless of whether they are friend or foe. And in fact, this is the core principle taught in the Mahayana Dharma. And it's that which I encourage you to investigate and develop a practice in yourself. And along the way, if you do that, you're also going to benefit your own mental health and your sense of well-being and happiness in the world. Regarding this tendency for us to act like cavemen when we live in the 21st century, Hawking wrote, "An even greater danger for future generations is that we will still have the instincts that we had in caveman days. Aggression in the form of subjugating or killing other men and taking their women in food has had definite survival advantages up to the present time, but now it could destroy the entire human race and much of the rest of life on Earth." And the problem is, as Blaise Pascal had pointed out, we don't usually listen to reason. And these days, people are less likely to listen to the words of scientists. And I think this has probably got a lot to do with the fact that there's just too much information these days. Scientists themselves have to specialize in very specific areas of their field in order to become knowledgeable. And because of this, they don't have all the answers. And on top of that, as lay people, we don't really know how to interpret the science. And so sometimes we hear things that we see to be contradictory. For example, we don't know the reasons why an immunologist might make a suggestion about something like COVID. And then it's very easy for somebody else to pick that apart or to use the general tactic of introducing something that's half true in order to refute something else. And so we ourselves don't know what to think. We don't know what the truth is. And then we have a lot of suspicion. And also, as Blaise Pascal had said, then we're more motivated by our emotions than by logic. So it's very difficult for us to act in an effective manner. Also, it's unlikely that the majority of people on the planet are going to become good meditators. But there is a role for you to play. Because if you become a more stable person, a more caring and loving person, then in a way you act as a beacon for others. If you have these qualities of contentment and well-being, then others see those to be important, and also they crave those experiences themselves. And if there are meditators, if there are spiritual practitioners who have good conduct, I might add, but also display spiritual qualities that are attractive to others, then there's a chance here of those spiritual practitioners influencing others. And it certainly has happened in the past. I mean, we look at figures like Francis of Assisi, for example. But I fear that ultimately there isn't that much hope for the human race because of our tendencies and because of our inability to adapt to new circumstances. I mean, I don't hope that to be the case, and I do everything I can to be of benefit. Also, I suggest that you should do the same and not become discouraged. But unless we learn to evolve, become more advanced in terms of our logic, reasoning, altruism, etc., unless we're able to have a more far-reaching view of the world, for example, think about the long-term consequences of our actions, then we will almost certainly wipe ourselves out. The best example of this that I can think of is the environment. Because essentially, although, for example, I'm quite old, then I won't see the consequences of our current actions, then my children and my grandchildren and their grandchildren certainly will. And in the future, they will resent us for our inaction. And then you shouldn't listen to all those people who are just flooding the zone with shit, right? Who are just trying to obfuscate the matter, trying to pretend there's no problem. It just reminds me of what the tobacco companies did in the past. They had this motto, it's like, doubt is our best friend. As long as people doubt that it's a thing, then they won't do anything about it. And that's what the industrialists hope will be the case. That's what people like Trump hope will be the case, because he's got a vested interest in the oil industry, for example. But it's madness. It's just absolutely insane. And so we need to develop kind of reasoning, logical reasoning. We also have to not be motivated by our emotions so much, or self-interest. For example, will I profit, or will I gain from this, or will I lose from this in the short term? And we have to develop a long-term view, which is extremely difficult, and it's unlikely. And at the moment, then it seems like the world is on fire. Things are becoming more unstable. Instability is a really dangerous thing in the world. We think, for example, if an authoritarian government topples somewhere in the world, then it's necessarily a good thing. But there's a kind of political vacuum there, and human beings are a bit chaotic, and they don't really know what to think or do. And so when they're put under duress, then they can act in really extreme ways that are very negative. So stability is a good thing. For example, we practice to have a stable mind, but we also need a stable society. And so it doesn't really help just getting excited and dropping bombs left, right, and center. The long-term consequences will not be good. So what I'm saying is you need your own headspace. If you're going to have your own headspace, then primarily, then you have to be able to spend time quietly on your own or in nature. You don't want to be overly influenced by external forces. And of these external forces, and one of the worst, is the stuff that comes to you through social media over your devices. We used to spend an awful lot of time in nature. And these days, the world is becoming more and more unnatural, especially with the advent of modern advanced technology. So this video has been going on for a bit too long, so I better finish up here. I just wanted to end with a statement from Richard Dawkins. This is his aspiration for the world, right? He seems to be a very clinical, hard-headed scientist, and many people have kind of criticized him for his position, but he did make one comment here about what his aspirations were. So he says, "Let us try to teach generosity and altruism, because we are born selfish. Let us understand what our own selfish genes are up to, because we may then at least have the chance to upset their design, something which no other species has ever aspired to do." Well, I claim that Mahayana Buddhism has sought to do this for at least 2,000 years. And if you're part of that movement, then I encourage you to apply yourself to your practice and do your best to develop an altruistic mind. Until next time, see you later.